Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the video for Elden Ring. My name is Ventus, and in this Elden Ring video guide, I want to show you my most powerful Elden Ring builds using my favorite weapons in the game. The weapons I'll be using for these Elden Ring builds are the Sword of Night and Flame, Marais Executioner, Rivers of Blood Katana, the Bolt of Gransax, and dual-wield twin swords. Now, if you don't yet have any of the weapons used in this video, please check the description of this video and the end screen for video links to guides on how to get each of these weapons. Alright, first up is the Sword of Night and Flame. This is a weapon that you can get fairly early in the game, but honestly, it carried me on my first playthrough because of its powerful magic attacks. It has two stances that you can activate by pressing and holding L2, and then pressing R1 or R2. The R1 stance is a powerful straight beam magic attack that scales with intelligence. R2 is a sweeping wave of fire that scales with faith. Both attacks are pretty powerful by themselves, but using the right build and equipping the right items can really make a difference. Here are how I have my stats allocated. Alright, so my attribute points for the Sword of Night and Flame build go just like this. My Vigor or Vigor is going to be all the way up to 60 so I can take a few hits. My Mind is boosted all the way to 68 so I can spam magic attacks with the swords as much as possible. My Endurance is at 50 so I can do a lot of roll dodging. My Strength and Dexterity are at 20. My Intelligence and Faith are boosted up to 50 so I can get the most out of the Sword of Night and Flame's attacks. And then my Arcane is all the way down at 15 because I do need a little bit of discovery. The talisman that I like to use for the Sword of Night and Flame build are these. The Carrion Filigree Crest, it lowers FP consumed by skills. If I wasn't using that, I'd also use this one, the Cerulean Amber Medallion +2. It vastly boosts maximum FP. And then there's going to be the Fire Scorpion Charm that raises fire attack power, the Magic Scorpion Charm that raises magic attack power, and then the Shard of Alexander to greatly boost the attack power of skills. For the Night and Flame Mixed Wondrous Physics, it's going to be super easy. We've got the Magic Shrouding Crack tier to temporarily boost magic attacks, and then the Flame Shrouding Crack tier to temporarily boost fire attacks. And when it comes to incantations for the Sword of Night and Flame build, I use Blessing of the Erd Tree. Grants a greater blessing to the caster and nearby allies, gradually restoring a large amount of HP, so heals over time. Then we've got the Golden Vow, increases attack power and defense for the caster and nearby allies. Protection of the Erd Tree increases damage negation for all affinity types except physical for both the caster and nearby allies. And then Flame Grant Me Strength creates an invigorating fire within that enhances physical and fire affinity attack powers. For those attack spells, we've got Giant's Flame Takes Thee, hurls a massive ball of raging fire. And then Flame of the Fell God releases a ball of raging fire said to be inhabited by a fell god. This fireball floats towards enemies and explodes, setting the area ablaze. Massive damage on that fireball. Alright, how I use the Night and Flame build in combat is when zone clearing, I use the buff Flame Grant Me Strength to increase my fire attack power. For enemies that are far enough away from me that they don't notice me yet, I use the incantation Giant's Flame Take Thee, a huge fireball that usually will destroy normal enemy health bars. For anything that survives that attack, a sweeping wave of Flame Stance will finish them off. For a group of enemies, the Flame Stance wipes them out, and if not, dodge roll away and hit them with another wave. For single enemies that are tougher than normal, the Night Stance goes first, which in most cases is enough to knock them back, and while they are recovering, I'll step a little bit closer and use the wave of the Flame Stance. And if they survive that, a few quick slashes of the weapon as a sword is all it'll take. For bosses, summon Spirit Ashes to tank and to keep the boss's attention while shooting Beam Blast from the Night Stance at a safe distance. When the boss is noticeably occupied by the Spirit Ashes, I'll move in close for a couple of Flame Stance waves, then dodge out when it starts to pay attention to me rather than the Spirit Ashes. When its attention is back on the Spirit Ashes, Flame of the Fell God does really good damage as well as Giant's Flame Take Thee. So pretty much keep distance, spam magic attacks, and only get in close for Flame Stance sweep when the boss is not looking. The second build I want to show you is with the Marais Executioner Greatsword. This sword comes with a unique skill called Eocade's Dancing Blade, a mostly strength but partly magical attack that telekinetically sends the sword corkscrewing through enemies. I love this build because it combines powerful greatsword jump attacks with a cool magic attack that shreds enemy health bars. Alright, so the way that I allocate my attribute points for the Marais Executioner Blade build are like this. My Vigor is going to be at 50, my Mind is going to be all the way up to 64 so I can use Eocade's Dancing Blade as much as possible. possible. Endurance is going to be 50, so I can do a lot of dodging. Strength is going to be at 50, so I can hit really hard with this weapon. Dexterity at 14, intelligence at 15, because you don't really use those that much with this build. Faith is going to be boosted up to 40, so I can use the necessary incantations. And then my arcane is going to be all the way boosted to 50, so I can get the most out of Eocade's Dancing Blade. So the talisman that I use for the Marais Executioner Sword builder like this, the first is going to be the Star Scourge Heirloom that raises strength. Normally my strength is just at 50, but with the Star Scourge Heirloom, my strength boosts all the way up to 55. Next, we have the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, because it greatly raises the attack power with successive attacks, and that is literally all that the Eocade's Dancing Blade does, just a bunch of successive attacks back to back. Next, the Magic Scorpion Charm to give a little bit more damage, because it does partly magical damage with the Eocade Dancing Blade. And then finally, the Shard of Alexander to greatly boost the attack power of skills, and that greatly enhances the power of Eocade's Dancing Blade. Alright, so the incantations that I like to use for the Marais Executioner Blade build are as follows. First, it's got to be Blessing of the Erd Tree for healing over time. And then we've got Golden Vow to increase attack power and defense. And then Protection of the Erd Tree to increase damage negation for all affinity types except physical. And then finally, Flame Grant Me Strength creates an invigorating flame within that enhances physical and fire affinity attack power. So obviously I'm not going to use the fire affinity attack power, but the physical part of this incantation definitely helps out with this sword. I don't really need any attack incantations, but you can throw some attack incantations in there if you want to. But I feel like the Marais Executioner Blade itself with the Eocade's Dancing Blade is all that you need. When it comes to the mixed wondrous physics for the Marais Executioner Blade, I only use these two. Stone Barb Cracked Tear makes attacks more likely to break enemy stances in a mixed physic, and then Thorny Cracked Tear makes consecutive attacks grow stronger in the mixed physic. The way I use this build in combat is simple. Dodge enemy attacks and find ways to fit in Eocade's Dancing Blade. For normal, non-boss type enemies, Eocade's Dancing Blade usually has enough power to knock them down, where I'll then follow up with a nice jump attack. More often than not, I'll use the running charge attack to knock enemies back a step, and then directly after, follow up with Eocade's Dancing Blade. If I'm able to charge Eocade's Dancing Blade long enough, it'll really knock my target backwards and down. Then I'll follow up with a jump attack or a charged heavy attack. For boss fights, I use all buffs and then summon my Spirit Ashes. I'll use something that has a lot of aggro to get the boss's attention, so I can sneak around and get a fully charged Dancing Blade attack in that usually deals a good chunk of damage. It won't give any knockback to a boss, but it does pack a punch. Other than that, I use it like any other greatsword, dodging attacks and countering whenever there is an opening. The third weapon I want to show you on this build is one that pretty much carried me through my first playthrough of the game from like the middle to the end of the game, and that is one for the Rivers of Blood Katana. The Rivers of Blood Katana is a slashing weapon with attribute scaling for strength, dexterity, and arcane, and comes with the unique skill Corpse Piler, a continuous slashing attack that advances and helps build up the onset of blood loss in enemies because of the consecutive attacks landed by the skill. The Rivers of Blood Katana calls for a bleed build, and as such, you should have a fairly high arcane to help with blood loss buildup in enemies. It also is a katana, so having a higher dexterity score is also necessary. Here are my attribute points and allocations for my current Rivers of Blood Katana build. My Vigor is going to be at 55, my Mind is going to be at 53, Endurance is going to be all the way up to 50, Strength is at 20, Dexterity though is all the way up to 50, Intelligence is going to be at 15 because you don't really need a lot of intelligence for this, Faith is at 40 for necessary incantations, then my Arcane is boosted all the way up to 50. When it comes to talisman that I use for the Rivers of Blood Katana, I use these. First is going to be this one, the Prosthesis Wearer's Heirloom. Normally my dexterity sits at 50 with this build, but with the Prosthesis Wearer Heirloom it goes up by 5 points, making it 55. Next is going to be the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia. It greatly raises attack power with successive attacks, which is pretty much what the Rivers of Blood Katana does. And then there's going to be the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, raises attack power when blood loss occurs in the vicinity. And then finally, the Shard of Alexander greatly boosts the attack power of skills. When it comes to my mixed wondrous physics when using the Rivers of Blood Katana, I use these two. First is going to be the Dexterity Knot Crystal Tear to temporarily boost my dexterity, and then the Thorny Crack Tear to boost successive attack power. And when it comes to my spells, my incantations for the Rivers of Blood Katana build, I use these. Blessing of the Erd Tree for healing over time, Golden Vow for increased attack power and defenses, Protection of the Erd Tree for increased damage negation for all affinity types except physical, and then Flame Grant Me Strength for increased physical and fire affinity attack power. For my attack spells, we've got Giant's Flame Take Thee, Swarm of Flies, and then Blood Boon. How I like to use this build in combat is actually really very simple. I spam corpse piler attacks until whatever you're attacking has built up enough blood loss to be stunned and affected, and then keep slashing them some more. I keep ranged magical fire attacks on this build like Giant's Flame Take Thee, so I can stun things out of range and close the distance for another corpse piler attack. For boss fights, I let the Spirit Ashes tank and take aggro while I launch blood loss build-up incantations such as Blood Boon and Swarm of Flies. Usually 3 Swarm of Flies back to back on a target that is occupied by my Spirit Ashes is enough for me to get in there with a running charged attack or running jump attack into Corpse Piler, and usually that is enough for the blood loss build-up meter in a boss to fill up and stagger them and give them a burst of damage. Continuous corpse piler attacks in between dodges with a sprinkling of charged heavy and jump attacks are my fighting style when using the Rivers of Blood katana. The fourth build includes the powerful Bolt of Gransax Spear. This is a special weapon with attribute scaling for strength and dexterity and has a unique skill called the Ancient Lightning Spear. When I first discovered this weapon, it instantly became my zone clearing weapon because of the Ancient Lightning Spear's long range and high damage, capable of taking out non-boss enemies almost instantly. Couple that with a variety of lightning based incantations, this weapon and build is great for almost any situation. I primarily now use this build for dragon slaying and enemies weak to lightning attacks. Because the Ancient Lightning Spear is a lightning attack, you will want a higher faith so that you can get the most out of the unique skill and other lightning magic you may have equipped. Here are my attribute stats for the current Bolt of Gransax build. Alright, so my attribute points are allocated like this for the Bolt of Gransax build. My Vigor is going to be at 55, my Mind all the way up to 83, so I can have as much FP as possible with this build. Endurance is going to be 45, Strength is at 20, Dexterity is at 50, Intelligence at 15, Faith as high as 50 so I can make my lightning attacks hit super hard, and then Arcane is at 15. The finger seal that I use for this build specifically is going to be the Gravelstone seal, and I have mine at plus 25. Sacred Seal made from Gravelstone, thought to be an ancient dragon scale, enhances Dragon Call incantations of the Royal Capital, so it makes lightning incantations hit a little bit harder. If you're wondering about the armor that I'm wearing using this build, I've got the Zamor mask, the Zamor armor, the Zamor bracelets, and the Preceptor's trousers. The basic talisman set that I use with the Bolt of Gransax build is this. I've got the Godfrey icon, raises charged attack power of sorceries, incantations, and skills. Absolutely makes those incantations hit like a Mack truck. Then we've got the Carrion Filigreed crest, lowers FP consumed by skills. Lightning Scorpion charm, raises lightning attack power but lowers damage negation. This is absolutely necessary. And then finally, the Shard of Alexander, greatly boosts the attack power of skills. So when it comes to the incantations that I use for the Bolt of Gransax Spear build, I've got Blessing of the Erd Tree for healing over time, Golden Vow for enhanced attack power and defense, Protection of the Erd Tree for increased damage negation for all affinity types except physical. Then Flame Grant Me Strength creates an invigorating fire within that enhances physical and fire affinity attack power. Now obviously I'm not going to be using the fire affinity attack power with this build, just the physical. However, I gotta tell you, I don't really see myself using this spear as a physical weapon a lot of the time. So mostly it's just me sitting back raining out lightning, but there will be times when I use this thing as a physical weapon, and it has a nice little animation when you spear something, it gets like red lightning around the target. We've got Flame Fortification, increases fire damage negation because this is a dragon slaying build and a lot of times dragons breathe fire. Flame Cleanse Me creates a fire within that burns away toxins, alleviates poison and scarlet rot buildup, and cures these ailments. Magic Fortification increases magic damage negation. So some of these dragons, they spew out magic breath, so this is great to like negate that damage. For attack incantations, Lightning Spear summons a lightning spear and hurls it before the caster. Charging causes a lightning bolt to strike the point of impact. This is absolutely the most useful incantation on my list. Then we've got Fortisax's Lightning Spear, creates 2 spears of red lightning and stabs them into the ground from above, one after another. On impact, each spear will burst into trails of lightning covering the area. And then finally, Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike. Summons a red bolt of lightning that scatters and spreads around the surrounding area. Charging enhances the range of the lightning bolts. If you don't have any of these lightning incantations that I've just talked about, I have complete guides on how to get them on the channel. Just check my playlist. And then on the mixed wondrous physic, this is a no-brainer. First, it's going to be the lightning shrouding crack tier, and then the faith not crystal tier. The lightning shrouding crack tier temporarily boosts lightning attack power in mixed physic, and the faith not crystal tier boosts your faith. Using this build in combat makes zone clearing super easy. Just hit things with lightning. The two main attacks I use when zone clearing are the Ancient Lightning Spear and the normal Lightning Spear incantation. Both have very long range and call down a bolt of lightning when fully charged and hit their target for added damage. The Lightning Spear incantation has a low FP cost at 18, so you can spam it to defeat single or multiple targets, and the same goes for the Ancient Lightning Spear attack. However, using the Carrion Filigreed Crest Talisman reduces that FP cost for all skills by 25%, which is a huge help for this build. For boss fights, it's more of the same as with other builds for me. Let my Spirit Ashes take the aggro while I rain down lightning from a safe distance. And because of the range of the skills used with this build, that distance is actually very safe. But even still, having a high HP will allow you to take a hit when you move in for the Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike at close range. The Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike is a powerful incantation that can be used at range to devastating effect, but the closer you are to your target, the more damage they will take because they will get hit with more bolts. This is by far the easiest build I've used in the game that carried me the most. And the fifth and final build that I want to show you is one that I beat the game with on my first playthrough, and that is the double twin sword bleed build. There are multiple versions of this build using different varieties of twin sword, so you can take your pick on which twin swords you want to use. I personally like using 2 copies of the actual twin swords. Now, if you only have one, you can pick up a second copy of the twin sword on New Game Plus. If you're on your first playthrough, however, I would suggest using one twin sword, and for the second, use Eleonora's pole blade. Now, the idea behind this build is using a jump attack that has multiple hits per jump attack with blood loss buildup on each blade, so you can quickly build up the onset of blood loss on your targets, non-boss enemies and boss enemies alike. This build is a boss slayer and drains boss health bars. Using twin swords calls for high dexterity, and because of the blood loss portion of the build, you'll also need a high arcane. Here are the way I have my stats allocated for my current twin sword bleed build. Alright, and the way that I have my attribute points allocated for my twin sword bleed build are as follows. My vigor is going to be at 55, my mind is going to be at 40, my endurance is all the way up to 61, simply so I can do a lot of dodging. Strength is going to be at 15, dexterity boosted up to 60 to get the most out of the twin swords, intelligence is 12, faith is going to be 40, and then my arcane is all the way up to 50, so I can get very good blood loss buildup in my enemies. Alright, so the equipment that I use for this build are actually a couple of different twin swords. So right now I have a bloody twin sword, just a regular twin sword blade, and then for my offhand weapon I'm going to be using the Eleanor's pole blade. My other twin sword weapons that I do have, I have the other plus 25 regular twin blade. It's bloody because it has seppuku Ash of War on it. If I wasn't using that and I wasn't using Eleanor's twin blade or pole blade, I'd probably be using the twinned knight sword, and then failing that, you one of these god skin peelers, and they're a little bit stronger weapon. I think some other people made some guides saying that these are actually the best weapons to use for the twin sword build when you're trying to get that double damage. The armor that I'm using for this build is going to be Diallo's Mask, Hoslow's Armor, Hoslow's Gauntlets, and Hoslow's Greaves. Alright, so when it comes to my talismans that I like to use for the Blood Loss Build-Up Twin Sword build, the basic set is going to be the Godskin Swaddling Cloth, Successive Attacks Restore HP. Then we've got the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia that greatly raises attack power with successive attacks. The Lord of Blood's Exaltation raises attack power when blood loss occurs in the vicinity. And then the Claw Talisman enhances jump attacks. And the incantations that I use for this Twin Sword Bleed build-up build are just going to be the basic combat buff spells, Blessing of the Tree, Golden Vow, Protection of the Tree, and Flame Grant Me Strength. And when it comes to the mixed wondrous physics that I use for this build, it's going to be this one. The Stone Barb Crack Tier makes attacks more likely to break enemy stances in a mixed physic. And then Thorny Crack Tier makes consecutive attacks grow stronger in the mixed physic. Alright, so how I use this build in combat is by jump attacking everything. First, before going into a zone or boss fight, I use the Ash of War for seppuku with blood affinity on the twin swords. If I happen to be using 2 twin swords and both have seppuku on them, I'll hold triangle on my PS5 controller and press L1. This equips my offhand weapon as my only weapon, and then I activate the Ash of War as normal. Once that seppuku is applied, I press and hold the triangle button again and press L1 and regain control of my main hand weapon while the offhand weapon still retains the seppuku effect. I then use the Ash of War on my main weapon as normal, and then both weapons have the seppuku effect at the same time. Now obviously this is a lot of work and self-inflicted damage on your character, and the effects will wear off on both blades eventually, which is why on the offhand for boss fights I'll sometimes use Eleanor's pole blade as a weapon that already has blood loss build up naturally. Now either way, because I am using the Ash of War seppuku with blood affinity, the twin swords will naturally have a blood loss build up to some degree even if seppuku isn't activated. When fighting boss type enemies, the strategy remains the same. Use Spirit Ashes as tank/aggro and run up on the boss with repeated jump attacks. Bleed will build up quickly for a huge burst of damage, and the amount of times the twin swords are hitting the target will greatly damage it, making this build in fights pretty fast, provided you keep up with dodging and avoid getting hit. Alright guys, and that's going to be it for my top 5 Elden Ring builds. Be sure to let me know down in the comments which one you like the most and try it out first. Again, for all the weapons used in this video, I have full guides for how to get each of them on this channel in my playlist for Elden Ring, along with other helpful guide videos for more than just builds. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace out.